Hey guys, it's Katherine. So I'm excited. I have time to do insider movies for you. But I'm not promising anything in the future. So I'm not at all. I haven't started the study course yet. I haven't been able to find the time. Anyway, let's do it. Let's do it. So I'm doing like half the stuff that I normally. And already, look at it. Already, though I have something to actually take it off with now. All right. So. Don't have the time to edit, so unfiltered, sorry. Don't have the time to edit. So, but I know you want it, and I want to give it to you, so we're going to do it. So, basically, so I wanted to share with you because we had the speech this week, right? We had the big, whatchamacallit, we had the big speech. I'm so sorry. I'm not at all, I can't do all of the stuff so that I normally do for you. So thank you for being very, very generous. But I have 2 movies for you, and the 2 movies are already on the AFI list. We were going to do them anyway. And I was trying to figure out, I was thinking like, oh, we could do these like on 4th of July weekend. These are movies that we actually, my group and I did on 4th of July weekend. And, but because of the nature of the POTUS speech, because of the State of the Union address, and it's like the first State of the Union I've watched in, I think since high school or something like that, when it actually happened on the night of, and, but I was like, yeah, I think we probably need to watch it. I think like what I liked about it was that whatever side you stood on, I could tell that I liked how it unified us in that I could feel that we as a nation were watching. It wasn't like, oh, like it's kind of like instead of us watching all together for the Super Bowl or something, we were finally as a nation unified watching for the nation. And I just loved that. I hadn't felt like that since I was a little kid. The nation hadn't been that unified. Which, by the way, did you know something really interesting? I went to a presidential library. Did you know that, they'll never tell you this because of the state of the media nowadays, but because of that, I didn't know this because, I grew up with the media that we have today. So, and we're finding that out in Game of Thrones, right? We're finding out the media changed in 1990. I was like, oh my gosh, 1990s when it started. No wonder I didn't know any of this. So did you know that Ronald Reagan was actually elected by like, what was it? 47 states. He won 47 states. And then the next round, he won more. I was just like, are you crazy? I've never heard of a president after a term gaining votes, like gaining states. Because I remember when I saw that, I don't know if any of you guys remember, but when I saw the funeral because when I went to school, anyway, let's just say, whatever. So I knew of him in school. He lived nearby where I was going to school. And so there was a place where we would cross paths. And so it made me interested when he passed away. And I was watching you guys are like, of course you cross paths. I'm like, I know it doesn't, dang it. So I got to see the Secret Service in action at a young age. But yeah, they were Secret Service people. No, it's not Secret Service, but at the funeral, I remember being surprised in Washington how flooded the streets were. And I remember being like, but he's a Republican. Like, why are the streets so flooded? I mean, it was just flooded for his funeral. I mean, that Washington was just overcut. And I remember just being like, but I thought he was terrible. Like, I don't understand. And then when I found out he was elected that way by so many states the first time, and then the next time it went up, I remember that's where I turned to my husband. I was like, that's why he was elected that many. And I was like, but I remember going home to my friend, and she's a really staunch, she is definitely in one party. She wasn't middle of the road. She's definitely one side, and she was definitely a Democrat. And she was like, oh yeah, the country was really unified back then. She was older than me. And she's like, we were really unified back then. I was like, really? She's like, yeah, actually, I even worked at his campaign headquarters. And my husband and I like fell off the couch. We were like, what? Like, we couldn't believe it. We were like, you did what? We couldn't even think of her doing that. So, I mean, there's things that we forget to history, like we forget those kinds of things. But anyway, so it's just one of those things that we had. There was a time I learned that once upon a time we were unified as a country. There has been a time during country, and I find that interesting that Dick Morris keeps talking about him as Reagan-esque or whatever, because I'm like, isn't that the one that nominated by so many states? I find that fascinating. I can see why he ran on his politics or his things, which is also why it confused me, because I was like, trickle down, whatever, that's politics. So the big speech thing happened. I'm doing the politics thing again, but I think we're just so fascinated by it. I think, like I said, politics is more interesting than any TV show right now. And Game of Thrones is amazing. Like every night our group, we sit it and like we put it on the mic and we put the, it's just like we love Game of Thrones. Like we're not watching movies anymore at night. We just listen to Game of Thrones. So I just love it. So the two movies, just kind of like in honor of that, because they're being mentioned so much, they're really famous movies and you're going to need to know them anyway. Like they're going to assume you know them and you've probably heard them mentioned around. And I've mentioned one already, is All the President's Men. All the President's Men, I mentioned that back into the November series, and that had to do with Spotlight. So for this Friday, it's not Friday yet, but I'm like, I've got time. I'm going to film it now. So we got it, and I'll just upload it. I don't know what I'm going to, whenever it gets uploaded, I'm just posting them when I can now because I don't have it. So, so it'll be All the President's Men, and then the second one is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And I remember when I played that on 4th of July, I think it was last year or the year before, and that's right, it was the year before, because they asked to watch it again the next 4th of July, I believe. If I remember that correctly, they asked to watch it again. And no, we watched it on Election Day. That's right. We watched it on 4th of July, and they asked to watch it on Election Day. That's right. And I was just like, we need to watch this, because the country was so divided and the vote was so big. And obviously our group is so wide that there were people of all different places. And I remember that I told our group, I was like, we're doing this election night. We didn't watch the election. We actually just watched Mr. Smith Goes to, that was a really good night. I remember, because you'll see when you watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's a black and white movie with Jimmy Stewart. Good way to be introduced to Jimmy Stewart. I would say it's best performance. Actually, no, you already met him in It's a Wonderful Life, but I still think this is his best. People would say that's his best performance. I think Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is his best performance of all time. All time. And I think and you know where I learned about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington? It's on the AFI Top 100, but I didn't learn about it when I did the AFI Top 100. I learned about it when I was in school. Someone actually showed it when I was a grade school kid growing up. It was like in high school, and they actually showed it. And I remember being like awestruck. I remember just being like that teacher showed a lot of she was a history teacher, and she just showed a lot of really good, it wasn't like advanced history or anything, but she just showed amazing movies as a way of teaching history. And it worked. It worked for me. Can you tell? I mean, it worked for me. It taught me my history. And it's not a history thing, but you will see why. And I bet you, with All the President's Men versus Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, again, it's black and white, but I bet you Mr. Smith Goes to Washington will be your favorite. I bet you it will be. And you'll wonder why you haven't heard of it yet. You'll wonder why you haven't heard of it. It used to be a classic that everyone knew about, and it's just faded. And it's important. And I just think it's they're both movies. One, And All the President's Men, is about Watergate, since everyone's talking about Watergate. Oh, this is worse than Watergate, or oh, this is different than Watergate. And oh, no, like, it's the same darn thing. It's about, you know, whether or not a president used the FBI to do something. Well, this is the exact same thing. Like, this is Watergate was a president using the FBI to do something, and how they got caught, how it was press who actually unearthed it and brought it to the forefront. And it's really ironic to see one of those actual journalists on TV today actually saying, like, going the opposite direction. Though you can see him sitting there biting his lip when they talk about journalistic integrity and being like, it's actually the journalist's job to cover things. And he's just like, oh, I can't really stand behind that. Sometimes it's hard. So, but things have really changed in the country. But back then, and by the way, I do want to say something. When you listen to in Game of Thrones, when they say things like, oh, you know, didn't we let JFK get away with things like Marilyn Monroe? I want to be really clear about something, because I actually wrote papers on this, and the press will admit this to you, like historians will admit this to you. The press didn't talk about personal lives in the media. Like, the media would not disclose personal lives. That's like things like Hoover and all those personal life things that they bring out now. There's a reason they're bringing those things out now, because the media had this like known rule of like, you talk the policies and you talk the politics and you talk world events, but you never ever talk about somebody's personal life. Like, you don't tell their personal life, and you kind of keep things hidden. And so there was this kind of like wall up about like, you'll talk to the people about what, you know, you honor the presidency or you honor the Senate, and you honor it by talking to the American people about helping policyholders get across what needs to be done, by helping the American people and guiding the discussion. And what broke that wall wasn't Marilyn Monroe. So people didn't know. That's why it's so funny, because afterwards they found out when they saw that video, you know, that's why that video of her singing Happy Birthday, Mr. President is so famous, because it clued America in that maybe something was going on, because no one had talked about it. And then she flaunted it so much. Like, she made it really obvious that she was coming on to the president so strongly when it wasn't being talked about in the papers or anything like that. Like, the press corps kept their mouths shut. And there might have been dirty magazine. No, it was just the press corps didn't say anything. They left that. They were like, that's, you know, it's the 50s and 60s, and they didn't talk about that kind of stuff. It wasn't like it is today, or even like it was in the 80s. What broke it, ironically, I don't know if it's ironic or not, but what broke it was the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War did it, and what happened is that the government was releasing all this stuff. And what they won't tell you, and I found this actually out from a Democrat, I found this out from Amazing Thing. It's amazing how people can change history now, is that it was actually like JFK who got us into the Vietnam War. Like, they changed history, and it was whatchamacallit. Like, I never knew that before. And it was actually a Democrat, you know, what's his famous name? He has that big house. Oh, I can't remember it. If I remember it, I'll tweet it or whatever. And he was like, actually, you know, historically, and it's like all documented and stuff. It's just that we try to change history because it suits us. It doesn't suit the Camelot narrative. And so and it's this whole thing of like how it's just fascinating, the politics of it. But it is what it is. Like, it is what it is. That's how we ended up getting into it. I was just shocked. But anyway, beyond that, so we were deep into it anyway. So, but that's not what did it. It wasn't JFK getting us into the Vietnam War and actually breaking peace there, because we had a stable government. They actually committed a coup there. It's really well documented. I'll try and find the documentary and get it to you guys. There's several documentaries on it, but there's one that did a really good job from our actual agents who were working over there. There's some amazing, because now, you know, it's all out there. All the records are public now, so it's all out there. There's some really great pieces out there. So I'll try and find those and share those with you. And I always think it's good for us to know history, because that helps us know what to do with the future, right? So, but what happened with Vietnam that broke the wall is that the government kept on putting out things, and it wasn't until Nixon was in office, and Nixon continued on the narrative of saying things are okay out there, and the press towed the line, until the press corps was over there, and they got their cameras, and they crossed over into a different part off base, like they got off where the military normally took them. And then they got film footage that the military had not been telling about. And it was a huge, and that footage got back to America, and Americans saw what was happening in Vietnam. Like, the letters were coming back and the American people were hearing about it. But the American press not only like saw what was happening, like got over there, got into it, saw that it was very different than what like the government was snowing them. It wasn't like open like it used to be, like with World War II and things like that. And it wasn't this open thing. It was like we were covering we were losing the war, and the government didn't want to say we're losing the war. It was the first word, and they didn't want to say we're losing. And they found out we're not just losing, but they found out how we're losing, but also what we were, they found out. And that was it. Like, it broke the trust, and the images came, and that's when the media sent the images over. And that's when you first see like these terrifying images that first come over. But that's why we have some of the most award-winning journalism photos from the Vietnam War. And that's why Americans were so shocked. That's why there's so much trauma from back then. And that's why there is so much hate against these men. It was horrible. Like, if you watch the movie Rambo, you'll find out how Americans actually treated soldiers who came back. Like, that's why it's so dangerous to demonize soldiers, because we have a history of hurting soldiers, beating them up and hurting them. And Rambo's a really good example of that. Like, I didn't know. I watched it with the group because we had to see it. And I was like, what? And like, the older members of our group was like, yeah, you didn't know? And I was like, no. Like, I never knew we treated our soldiers that way. It was terrible. Anyway, so, but man, when that wall came down between the press and the government, everything came down. And that's when they just started sharing it all, like their private secrets and everything. And so the whole thing of like, oh, should we, the public was accepting of the Marilyn Monroe. Public didn't know about Marilyn Monroe. So don't, that was just the media, like saying like, we've switched tact, and we're going to change. And that's when the 1990s, Doug Weed's such a tactician. He's being so good in that book. So there was a significant shift, because that's when you start hearing things significantly change. And I'm sure you guys are reading it too and hearing it that way. But anyway, enjoy All the President's Men. It's absolutely fabulous. And for those of you who don't know, Nixon was a Republican, so this is not about party, obviously. And I think I was talking to a friend today, and he was saying, well, I'm a former this party. And I was just like, I don't think it's about parties anymore. I think it's much more about like, I think we've gone beyond that, haven't we? Like, it's not, because the things that have happened, like, it's just a betrayal of, I think, our nation's trust. Like, the media is betraying our trust. Like, a lot of Americans found out the media's been not honest with us, and they want to hear about these stories, and they're not hearing about these stories. They've also, like, I know our entire town was talking about, leadership that clearly, it's like, who are they representing? And I want you to think about that. Who are they representing? Who does the media represent? Because the media pundits that you see online, for example, like, I just found out George Stephanopoulos, like, who's on, like, what is it, NBC and everything like that, who's like grilling our White House representatives. We just found out in Game of Thrones, he is a Clinton aide. And I'm like, why is a Clinton aide acting like supposedly an unbiased reporter holding debates and everything? How are we? That's not a reporter. I was shocked. I was just like, how many are, what is going on in our nation? Like, how many of these reporters are actually reporters, or were they actually just working for another powerful president at some point in time, and they're supposed to be reporting for us fairly and accurately? This is a really unique time in history, and I don't think that it's about parties. I really don't. I think that I think that the pundits who are out there, I'm not saying George Stephanopoulos, but you have to keep in mind when people have been asking me, like, why do you think the media is this way? Why do you think the media is this way? You have to remember that the media is not getting their paychecks from us or from advertisers, right? Like, their ratings aren't that high, right? They're not owned by the U.S. anymore. Like, keep that in mind. They're not owned by the U.S. anymore. You know? And when you hear the sheer amounts of money that are going through these lobbyists' hands, like, you think that, you know, they're bought and sold long ago by other countries, you guys. And go ahead, research it. Find out. Do the trail. You guys are great at that, right? Be a little searchers. Do your little YouTube searches and all that kind of stuff, or Google searches. Be smart. Know which stuff is propaganda. Like, it was really interesting because the European Union is all unelected officials. That's why they passed 80 laws a day that benefit big money, big corporations. That's why small businesses have all shut down. That's why Brexit happened. And all of a sudden, after Brexit, in this panic that other countries might leave, all this propaganda started of all these articles saying, you know, oh, what is this saying? You know, who started the rumor that all the EU officials are unelected? And it's all this, and then the whole article will be like, so, you know, but they're elected by the other officials in the EU and everything. So technically, they're not elected by, you know, the people. But I mean, that would just be too much bureaucracy. So we're really just being efficient. And it's just like, I'm like, wow, all these articles weren't here when Brexit happened, you know, like people just made too informed a decision. And that's really what it came down to, is that there are no elected officials. And look what happened. Like, small businesses just were rendered. And a lot of people, I really think Brexit happened because I was really digging into that. I think it happened because so many, not because of what the media says, because we know what the media is owned by. Even the BBC is just dead. If you read the BBC's new byline, like, I went to apply for a BBC job until I read the new BBC, like, guidelines, and they said you'll be quizzed on this to see if you know it. It didn't say it's a news organization. It says we're an entertainment organization dedicated to creativity, a creative agency. Do you know what a creative agency is? Have you watched Mad Men? A creative agency is an advertising agency. Advertising agency are bought by outside companies. And I was like, no wonder the BBC programming's changed. Like, it explains a lot of that. It explains why Panorama's dead. Like, why they used to do, like, weekly programs. They don't do that anymore. All their investigative journalism has died. It was just costing all these companies too much money. All the corruption was being found out. And yeah, it's a really changing world. But I mean, thank goodness for YouTube. And that's one of the things that happened with Brexit, is that I was looking around because I wasn't a voter, but I was just like, I want to find out what this is. And so many people on YouTube were sharing their stories about life before the European Union and life after, and about countries that were up for being in the European Union, and like what would happen to them. And all of them said that, you know, small businesses die because the only things that can live up to these 80 plus rules a day are big corporations. And so, like, it's like every mom and pop shop goes out and all the Walmarts move in. Like, that's just it. Like, every, you know, because they even put out Cadbury. Like, they even made a rule about the only thing that qualifies as chocolate. So it can't be sold as chocolate unless it has these exact ingredients in it. And so Cadbury chocolates could, like, no longer be sold, or say it was like a favorite. It was like the main chocolate sold in Britain. So, you know, big money is just running the world. And I find it very interesting that only in America do they use the term conspiracy theories. I find that very, very interesting. You don't hear about conspiracy theories in China. You don't hear about conspiracy theories in Russia. You don't hear about conspiracy theories in India. No, you hear about corruption. But you don't hear about corruption in America. The moment corruption will always go so far until they go, oh, it must be conspiracy theory. Like, you know, say anyone would knock somebody else out and it must be a conspiracy theory, because why would anybody ever knock somebody else out? Like, the America must be, you know, free and clear, except that we are the #1 leader of the world. Why would the world leader with more power than China, than Russia, than India, all three combined, why would we have less corruption? Like, does that make sense to you guys? So anyway, watch these movies. I think it's very interesting. Be empowered, find out, research for yourselves, independent thinking. And I'm really glad I got to do this video again. And All the President's Men is incredible. Really watch the directions and the shots. Okay, I'm getting too tired. I really worked a lot today without breaks. I'm really proud of myself. I did a lot of work today. I got a lot done on the project. Part of the reason I get to do this. So I worked a long time. I had a good day and I took advantage of it, but I'm exhausted. So I am out of steam. I love you guys so much. So enjoy those 2 movies and I'll see you when I see you. I love you so much. Enjoy. Bye.